Today, we're going to start and complete the front-end development aspect of this project right here. Before we begin, I wanted to mention this video sponsor, Skillshare.com, which is an online learning community for creators with over 25,000 classes in design, business, and more. So whether you want to fuel your curiosity, your creativity, or even your career, Skillshare is the perfect place to do just that. For instance, you're about to watch my front-end development tutorial that includes JavaScript, but you could watch these full JavaScript courses at Skillshare. Skillshare is also super affordable with an annual subscription of being less than $10 a month. But if you're one of the first 500 people to click on the link here in the description in YouTube, then you get the first 2 months 100% free. So join up. Hey everyone, what's up? Gary Simon of CourseCetro.com. So this is the second and final part in the video series of how to create a modern landing page. And in the first video, in the last video, we basically designed this here in Adobe XD. Now for today's task, we have to take this and make it a reality as it sits currently right here in the browser. So we're going to be dealing with front-end development such as HTML, CSS, Sass, and also some JavaScript using GSAP, which is the GreenSock animation platform, to handle some of these interesting sequence animations. So I'm going to show you exactly how to get started and do everything from scratch. All right, so make sure to check out the description. There's the Codepen in here if you want to see the code, and also make sure if you haven't yet to subscribe. So let's get started. All right, so here we are in the Adobe XD document, and this is what we created during the first part of the video tutorial. And our job now, assuming the role of a front-end developer, going from a UI designer to a front-end developer, is to take this and make it a reality in the browser and on various devices with web technology such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so the very first question that you should ask yourself is, when you're looking at a mock-up or a prototype like this, what is it that we need in terms of assets? All right, so an asset is going to be something like an SVG graphic or a JPEG graphic or PNG or whatever. And we need to use as few assets as possible because each one of those assets will eat up bandwidth and it'll slow down the load time of a page. Now, especially, if we're talking about really tiny graphics like SVG graphics, maybe like this little triangle, for instance, it's very fast, but nonetheless, you want to minimize them as much as possible. So looking at this right here, go over each element and ask yourself, does it need to be an asset? Gary Simon. Okay, well, usually this is just where a logo is on a website. And for this one, it's just a type-based logo, like a word mark as it's called. And it's just a font of Montserrat, and we can import that easily. So this doesn't need to be any type of asset. Ordinarily, though, most logo designs are unique. You would have to actually export them as an SVG graphic, perhaps. The navigations, these are never assets. They're pretty much always done through HTML and CSS. This stuff's all fine. This right here, the triangle, you can actually do triangles in HTML and CSS, but it's a little bit less straightforward. So we're going to make this an asset that we export. So that's one asset so far. And then, of course, this background graphic, this is going to be a JPEG. Generally speaking, when it comes to photographs, you want to use the JPEG as a file format as opposed to something like PNG. And of course, you can't do that with SVG. So we're going to use JPG right here. And anything else, we have our triangle. So we'll reuse that asset in HTML and CSS. And then everything else right here is pure HTML and CSS that we can handle. So as you become more familiar with HTML and CSS, you'll know right off the bat what needs to be an asset versus what can actually be achieved through HTML and CSS. It just takes time and practice. All right, so we have two assets. We're going to take this right here, and by the way, we can get out our layers, and instead of naming this path 1 because that's the name it will automatically give you your asset when you go to export it, we'll name this arrow, and then this one, let's just name this I think we'll name it hero, like a hero section. All right. So let's first take this little triangle asset right here, select it, and we can right click and export selected. For this, we're going to choose an SVG graphic, and that means that it's going to be able to scale without any type of quality loss. And we're going to change this directory. We're going to create a new directory wherever you store your code projects or your projects for your web projects. I'm just going to call this musician. And then we're going to create another folder called images. You can name it assets or whatever you wish. This is a simple project. I'm just going to have 2 image assets. So we're going to select a folder and export it. And then we'll take this background graphic, export selected again. This time it's going to be a JPG. Quality, if you make it 100%, it's going to be quite a bit. So let's just try 80 and we'll export that as well. It'll remember your previous folder. So we're going to keep this up though because we want to refer back and forth to it when we're doing our HTML CSS, which begins now. So let's get this new Visual Studio Code window open. So Visual Studio Code, for those of you who are new, it's completely 100% free code editor for writing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and anything else by Microsoft. And it's very popular. I like it, and you can do a lot with it. So you can get that for free. You know, once again, just go to Google and type it in. And I should preface this. This is very important. Hopefully, you already have experience with HTML and CSS because this particular tutorial is not going to be for somebody who's brand new to HTML and CSS. I have a different course, though, that I released just earlier this year that is a complete introduction to both UI design, that's a separate course, and then also HTML, CSS as well. So I would really advise you to watch that first, because it's going to give you a basic, a very comprehensive understanding from a beginner aspect of HTML and CSS. It's because I'm not going to be covering all the absolute basics. And so once you watch that, you can come over here. All right, so I'm going to shut up now. Let's open the folder, musicians. We'll select it. And here we go. We see our images folder in here with our 2 assets. So let's go ahead and create an index.html. All right. So I just also recently covered a little quick crash course on Emmet abbreviations. And Emmet is basically a quick way to write out your HTML. So if I hit exclamation point, hit enter, it'll provide us with all the basic HTML tags that we need to get started for a legit HTML document. I'm just going to call this musician as well for the title. It shows up in the browser. And let's get started with writing the HTML. So let's revert back here real quickly to our document. So the very first thing that I envision happening is right up here. It's this element. So if you don't have to follow along with this, by the way. This is right here is the first HTML element that I want to design for. It's going to be contained basically in a block, and that's going to be the logo, and then a navigation. And the way we're going to situate this block level element here in HTML, we're going to use CSS position absolute. That means it's going to sit on top of this other layout right here. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, so to get started, I'm going to put in a header. Oops, there we go. I was screaming. Header element, and then inside, and that will be that red outline. It's not going to be red, but that's going to be the invisible block that contains everything. And then we're going to have the logo. So the logo, I'm just going to make an ahref here. So it's not going anywhere. So we're going to put the hash sign. It's not going to another page or anything. And then also, by the way, we're going to give it a class of logo. We can reference it in CSS. And then for the anchor text, Gary Simon. All right. Next, we're going to have our nav element. And this is just a semantic HTML tag that allows you to define what your navigation is. And then we're going to have our UL. And then inside of it, we're going to say LI. Now, what did I just do here? This is another Emmet abbreviation that I just covered. And you'll see that if I hit enter, it gives us that quick boilerplate. I'm probably going to not use this too much. I don't want to confuse beginners, but if you check out my Emmet recent from last week, my Emmet video, it'll show you how to really speed things up quite a bit, like this even you can do. All right, so instead, I'm just going to type UL, LI, and then we'll give this, I Actually, we're not going to have any classes. We're just going to have an A in here. These are going nowhere because they're just for show. So this is going to be home. And I'm going to hit Shift Alt and down 2 times to replicate that line. And then also contact. So this HTML right here, in terms of the HTML itself, is all that we need in order to achieve these things right here. All right. Now, of course, if we were to view this in the browser right now, it's not going to look anything like that. That's going to be the job of CSS, which we'll get to after we do the HTML. And that's the flow that I like to do. You could do it like right now. You could start doing the CSS, but I just prefer to get all the HTML out of the way. So let's go ahead and keep on going. So I'm going to hit Control B to get rid of that sidebar. We'll have a little bit more room, make this a tad bit bigger. So now the next part that we need to create the markup for, or the HTML for, is going to be this block right here. Usually we start from top left and work our way. And we're going to have basically 3 different sections. This one right here that contains this stuff right here. And then also this one, which contains that content. And then this one, which contains all this content as well. So 3 different blocks that we're going to need to create the HTML markup for. So I'm going to contain, and I'm going to structure this layout using the CSS Grid. So there's multiple ways to structure a layout. You can use the flex grid. You can use more of the old school approach, like display inline and floating and all that. We're going to use the grid, which is the more modern way of achieving layouts, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. And so in order to do that, we have to have a parent HTML element that kind of contains all of them. So if we go back here, think of a parent as being like this. Let me just draw this out real quick so you can see what I mean. So we'll get our red and we'll make it bold. So this is going to be this invisible container that contains all 3 of these blocks right here. So hopefully you'll understand, and it will make more sense once we get to the CSS portion. So we'll do div wrapper. That's another abbreviation there. Actually, to make that more simple, we could just do wrapper like that, and because div is used the most, it'll make it a div element. And then what we're going to do is we have to ask ourselves, what type of HTML element do we want to represent each of these blocks? I'm just going to use the HTML section element. So section, we're going to give it a class of hero. So this is going to be the HTML block for this section right here. Next, we'll do the featured yellow section on the upper right, and that's going to be section class of sidebar. Just going to call it sidebar. It's not really a bar or anything. Then we'll do section. I should probably call it featured or something. And then subscribe. So now we have to actually write the HTML markup for this stuff right here. So what we have here is a headline right here. We have a subheadline, and then we have a button right here. So we have 3 elements really. For this one, where headlines, you usually use the heading or H1 tag. These will probably be H2s as well. And then this right here can just be a simple paragraph tag. And then this right here, I think we're just going to make that just a normal href tag, an A tag. So let's write those real quick. So inside of here, we're going to have an H1 element, and we're going to say go musician. After that, we're going to say, we're going to have a paragraph. I'm going to paste this in off screen real quickly. There you go. That's the text that we specified in Adobe XD. And then also our ahref. And we're going to give this a class. And we're going to say read button or BTN and also primary. And I'm giving them 2 classes because if you look over here, we have the same sort of design right there. But I want to style this slightly differently, so I'm going to give it another class of primary. All right, and then our anchor text is get famous. Okay, so Now, one thing that I want to consider, we could just get away with adding this, but I actually want to add a couple other HTML tags. And the reason being is because I want to be able to use the CSS Grid to take all three of these elements, and I want to be able to move them perhaps in the center of this element right here of its basically its parent container, which is the section hero class element. And in order to do that, we need to wrap it in its own container like that. So we're going to just give it a div class of inner. Let me just get rid of that real quickly. We'll get that closing div tag right there, and then indent that back in. So now everything is going to have its own little div class that we can style with CSS. Also is another thing. I want to have a certain effect that's placed on this text so that when the page loads, it's going to kind of reveal the text in a really unique way. Not too unique of a way, but it's going to make it seem like it's coming out of like a clipping mask of sorts. So we have to give it an HTML element as well that'll have like a wrapper. So I'm going to call this div clipper. There we go, div clipper. And we're just going to put that right here. All of this, it would be unnecessary, this right here, this div clipper, if you didn't want to have that sort of animation. But this is required if we're going to do that sort of animation where it kind of comes from nowhere and it comes up and it becomes visible. So you'll see how this works if this is confusing for you once we get to the CSS section. So just bear with me. I don't want this to be too overwhelming. Next up, we're going to have yet another div element for these two elements right here. And let me just tell you why. If we go back, we have, let's see, we have this element is going to animate in on its own. It's going to be the first thing that animates these three elements right here. They're going to stagger animate, and you'll see how I do that with GSAP. But then I want to have the supporting elements like this, as well as these two elements, and as well as these elements down here. I want them to kind of animate as well and kind of just like fade in together. So if they're going to be together, you see this outline right here, we need a div container that contains both of them and makes them siblings. So we're going to say div with a class of anim-panel. Let's wrap that in there, closing div tag there, and we will tab that in. There, I know it's a lot of markup, but because we want certain animations to take place in a certain way and we want to style it in a certain way, then they're necessary. So that's it for our very first section. So this markup right here is indicative of all of this right here. Okay, so now let's do this section, the featured section. So right here under featured, we're also going to have that same class of inner. All right, so div inner. Inside of there, we're also going to have that little clipper class as well. So I'm just going to paste this. I'm going to hold shift and then we'll tab it in. There we go. This right here is not going to be H2 element. It's going to be an H1 rather. It's going to be an H2 element with the text of featured. So there's H1 through H6, by the way, if you're unfamiliar with that. The most important elements go in H1 and then on down. So we'll have two H2 elements for that. We're also going to have that same div class anim panel. So let me just paste that in real quickly. And this is going to be a different type right here. So we're just going to have lorem ipsum text. All right, so you can type in lorem. I'm not sure how many words I want. You can type like lorem and then the number of words that you want. I'm not sure if 40 is going to be correct. I actually did have a certain amount already, but I didn't do a count, so I'm just going to paste that in right there. Okay, so that's how much it is. And then also this is going to have a read button as well, but it's not going to be primary. We're going to remove that one. This one just says read more. So that's it for this section, for the sidebar. And then we have the subscribe section down here. So this stuff, we have an H2, a paragraph, and then a form element and a button. So let's keep on rocking. So again, the same sort of thing that we have going on. We have our inner, so div class inner, div class clipper, H2 is going to be subscribe. All right, and we have to close the div tag right here, rather. There we go. And then let's get that into place. So after this right here, we're going to put in our div class of anim panel once again. And inside of here, we're going to have our paragraph. And this is just get the latest updates about this website and stuff. Paste that in. And then also the next element is the input. So this is going to be input text. The name, we just make this email, I guess. We don't need an ID for this. And we need a placeholder though. So placeholder is email address. And then finally, we're just going to use a button element for this with a class of CTA for call to action button. Subscribe now. All right, that's it for the HTML. So let's save this and hit Control B to get our sidebar. And by the way, we're going to right click and choose Open with Live Server. If you don't have that option, come to the extensions, type in Live Server, and click on this and install it. And then it'll reload your Visual Studio Code, and you'll have access to this command when you right click Open with Live Server. Before we do that, let's create our CSS first. And we're not going to write any just yet, but I wanted to show something first. So come in here just after the title. It doesn't matter where it's at. It could be anywhere in the head tag. Link. And then we have to link up our CSS, our style sheet. So we'll make it in a folder called CSS main.css file. So let's create that folder called CSS main.sass. We're going to use Sass. All right. So that's another extension that you're going to need to install. So if you type in live Sass, we can see we have the live Sass compiler. All right, that's the one we want to install. And if we go back here and we choose Watch Sass, it will automatically create our CSS file. So if you're not sure what Sass is, it's basically, it gives you extra abilities to write CSS, and it compiles what you write down here into regular CSS. So there's nothing in it just yet, as you can see. So every time you make an update here, it'll translate there. This is another one of those things where you need to have some experience with Sass in order to follow along. Again, I have a Sass course on my website, I mean, not my website, but on my channel. So if you go to my channel search and just type in Sass or SCSS or SASS, you'll find that as well, and it'll give you a good introduction. All right, so now we have that all linked up. Let's right click and open with Live Server on the index.html file. And so that will load up this. Yes, we have all the HTML done, but of course it looks like absolute garbage. That's because we have no CSS that will take all these HTML elements and style them with CSS properties. All right, so let's go ahead and get cracking on the CSS. All right, so let's go ahead and, all right, so the very first thing, by default, the browsers will add some margin, and they won't set the body element to 100%. Of the browser. So pretty much every web design that I do, I'm doing this at the top. Body HTML, we'll say margin 0, and then body height 100%. And like right now, if I don't save this, but we show you the little bit of margin that's right there, and then I save this, you'll see it goes away. So it pushes everything right against there. I want to define my own margin and not work with anything that's default on there. Also, the font family. So font family is going to be Montserrat, my very favorite font. So this font right here, if you have a serious web project and you're using a font that's not like a system font or whatever, like if you're not just specifying Arial or whatever, or serif or sans serif, then you're going to want to import that font at the top so that it will be downloaded and people will be able to see the intended font that you wish them to see. For this font, we can find it by going to Google Fonts. So google.com/fonts. If I do a search, type in Montserrat, we'll see it's right here. Where did it go? We'll click plus rather. I haven't done this in a while. Uh-oh, there's something wrong with their site. Are you kidding me? So I don't think this is going to work right now. All right, there it goes. Yeah, there's something wrong. It's not even loading the fonts right. My internet's been going crazy lately. Holy crap. Okay, it's starting to work more. We want light 300 and bold 700. Oh my God. Oh my God, import. What is happening? There we go. We want to copy this right there. Finally. Oh my God, that was horrible. And we're just going to go to the top and import it right there. So it's font family. We can see our weights, 300 and 700 is what we want. And there we go. So ready to rock in that regard. So now if we look at the site, so actually there's some sort of issue that's occurring here. If I just use this import right here, this import statement, it's not working correctly. I think there's an issue with the internet or something. So I already have it installed on my machine, so I'm just going to remove that, and then now we can see the font has updated from that serif font to this font now. Okay, great. So let's continue on. Here, a little bit on down the line, I'm going to put a comment just temporarily, and that's going to be display none. We're going to actually add that later on, and I'll tell you why. I'm not going to mention why yet, but we'll do it near the very end, and you'll see. Okay, so now let's start asking ourselves, now we have all this basic stuff done, not too much of it. We want to start working our way from the top down, and we can refer to our index.html, and we can look at, what is the initial information here that we have to work with, or the initial HTML elements that we need to style with CSS. So we're going to start with the header and this logo and navigation right here. So we're going to reference for our selector, it's just going to be header, the HTML element itself. And remember I mentioned before, we're going to do position absolute to position this entire header on top of the regular layout. And so we're also going to add padding, 1 EM. So you can see if we go back here, there's padding around it. So it's not like this. We have this. So this padding of this element that we're defining right now, the header element, will be contained within here, and it's going to push things away from the side. Also, we're going to say Z index. We're going to make that high, something like 20, simply because we have some other elements coming in down the road that this will need to be on top of for animation taking place on this, because we're going to have each of these panels kind of zoom in a way, and it will override them while it's doing that animation. So we have to make sure that this is in the stacking order is on top of that. All right, next we're going to have display. We're going to use the flex layout for just this right here. So this is now, this header element is going to be a flex-based layout for handling the logo and the navigation. All right, so let's go back here. And inside of here, we'll say justify content, space between. Now this is a property that goes hand in hand with flex, and that's basically just going to push out and away from each other the logo and the navigation. So the logo will be on the left, and the navigation will be on the right. Oh, and by the way, very important, the way we're doing this mobile first. So let me organize this so that you can see what we're doing here on the right. So we're going to simulate like what this looks like on a phone, basically. And get this over here. So now when I make adjustments, I can save them. You can see what's happening. So the reason it's important to go the mobile first approach when writing your CSS is that it will eventually make it easier and provide usually less coding in terms of CSS to achieve your responsive layout. So we start off by defining what this layout will look like in CSS on a mobile phone, and then work our way on up by adding media queries. Okay, so let's continue on. So justify content, the width of the header element. Right now you can see it's all messed up. If we just type in like 100%, you're gonna see it does push it out now like that. But at the same time, it's also pushing, you see this scroll bar at the very bottom? We don't want that. So we want to use the calc function where we remove the 1em from the left and the right. So we're subtracting it, and we're subtracting 2. Because this padding element will add 1em on the top, bottom, left, and right. So we just want the right and left. We save it, and then we get rid of the scroll bar. Now this looks horrendous, of course, but that's default unordered list, or the UL list that we're going to be doing, styling from the browser. So let's go ahead, and the one thing that we'll do is we're going to say background white. Now the background already looks white, but it won't be once we input that image right here. All right, so now one thing that we can do with Sass, which is one of the reasons we're using Sass here instead of just a regular old CSS file, is we can do nesting here. So inside of our header element is this A element. So we can just put this right here. So we can say A, text decoration is going to be none, color is going to be black. So now it just changed, it got removed, it removed that underline, and it also got rid of the default sort of purplish hyperlink color for both of these. Next up is we're going to also reference a.logo. So the A's right here was just some reference to any link, and there's multiple links. There's a link right here, and there's also links right here, here, and here. But I want to reference this now specifically, so we reference our logo right there, our logo selector. So we're going to say font weight is going to be bold, and we can say text transform uppercase. There we go. Let's continue on. Next we have our nav. So the nav element itself, we don't have to style it all, but we have to do the UL. So we could put nav UL, or we could just omit that and just put UL. I'm going to leave it. List style type is going to be none. That gets rid of those default blocks or little circles right there. And then also display. This is going to be flex as well, a flex container. Once we make that, it automatically floats them to the right of each other. If you recall, this is what they look like that. Also, we're going to say justify content is going to be space around. And then also width will be 100%. Margin is going to be 0, and padding is going to be 0. All right, starting to get somewhere. Next, we have our LIA. So we're not going to style the list items, but just the A, the links inside of them. Padding is going to be 1em, not 21 em. Let's see, what does 21 em look like? Okay, it looks horrible. Okay, so let's just do 1 em. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Good stuff. Okay. So now let's start working on the next element, which is the wrapper itself. All right, so let's come on down here outside of everything. All right, so it's going to be, remember I said a grid display, so not flex, but grid. All right, and we're going to say grid template columns are just auto. And inside of here, we have our first section. Now, this isn't just in relation to the first section, because I'm not specifying the class, but all the sections. So they're going to have certain properties that they all share. So the first is padding. We're going to say on the mobile view 3em. I think that's a pretty good amount of padding. It's actually quite a bit amount of padding, but I like it right here, so that seems pretty good right there. Also, inside of our sections, we also have other things that share certain properties with each other. You have H1 and H2s right here, and also our read buttons. So one thing I'm going to apply to all of them is right here. We're going to say text transform uppercase, because that's how we designed it in our mockup, and margin 0. I'm going to add to all of them. All right. So next we're going to have our H2 elements, and the font size is going to be 1.4 rem. All right. And doesn't look like it changed too much, but nonetheless, I've added it. And then also our read button. So our read button, once again, is in relation to, if we look at the index.html, is right here. So it's this element right here, and also right here. All right, so this is where we're going to have to use our asset for that triangle. So first we're going to say text decoration none. And we're going to say also color is going to be black. We're going to say font weight is bold, because it is. And then we're going to say background URL images arrow.svg, and no repeat on that. So now we could see that that image. And then also we'll do background size. This will allow us to specify how big it is, just 8 pixels. And then also background position is going to be like 0, and then 1 pixels. So 0 on in terms of horizontal movement, and then 1 pixel down. So it kind of centers it up with that button, or not the button, but this type right here, which we obviously have to fix as well. We also, the way we fix that, by the way, is padding left 1 EM. There. Great. So now we also have, let's style this button specifically because it has a class of primary and this one doesn't. So to do that, let's close that right here. We're going to say primary. And we're going to say, let's see here, padding. We'll say 1.5 EM. And for now, we're actually going to go ahead and change that after these other properties, but I just want to demonstrate one thing. So we're going to do background position is 3 EM. All right, so that's basically taking our background position and moving it specifically just for this primary button right here. So it's leaving this one alone. It's not going to change any of this because any change we make in here is only going to be applied to this HTML element right here, which is this get famous button. So we're just kind of styling it to be more consistent with this look as opposed to this look right here. So I really want to explain this stuff, so hopefully I'm not being too verbose here. So 1 pixels, solid gray. There it is. Also, margin left, or margin top, we're going to start with 3 EM. And then also, in order for that to work, we're going to do a display inline block. That way, if you're dealing with the A element and you want to be able to move it around with margin, you either do display block or inline block. And then also margin left is going to be -3 EM, because there's 3 EM right here of padding. We want it to look like this right up against the edge. We want it to go all the way to the edge of the browser. So if we save it, there we go. We need to go back up to here where it comes to our padding. Where are we at? Yeah, 1.5 EM. So see how this is sitting right here and that looks horrible? It should be more like this. Well, okay, so the padding property will also allow you to specify the top right, bottom left. We know in the top we want 1.5, the right we want 1.5, the bottom we want 1.5 EM as well, but we also want more. So we're going to calculate 3 EM, because we want this to be pushed all the way from 3 EM, because that's how much white space there is just for this text right here element, plus like 25 pixels. There we go. There. Coming along quite well. Also, we're going to have our other element, our clipper element. As you can see, the clipper element is placed onto this Go musician right here. And we're going to say overflow hidden. All right, so for now, that's not going to show anything, but you'll see on down the road, once we get to the GSAP part, you'll see it will come into play. All right, so next, let's go ahead and start specifying our specific sections. So we have our section right here, and this ends right here. So now inside of wrapper, we're going to put section.hero. So we're going to start doing the CSS for that. So first, we're going to say padding top is a lot, like 80M. And that's really going to push things down. We're also going to say background URL is going to be our images, our hero.jpg. Now, we're also going to do background size, cover. There we go. Now it's starting to come along, isn't it? Awesome stuff. So now inside of here in our hero section, we have a paragraph. Let's do that. And we'll say padding. Oh, no, we won't. We'll say width is about 70% because you can see where it says the, it's going into his chin. And so we're going to make it not 100% by default, but 70 by default anyhow. Not by default, but through our CSS rule set. Then we're going to say font size, just a little bit larger than what it is, so 1.2 rem units. Now, the reason we're using rem units here and for all the type essentially is because going on a little bit later on down the road when we encounter our first media query to make the site responsive, all we have to do is modify the HTML elements, font size, and everything else, including the padding and margin, will scale easily, perfectly. So you'll see how that comes into play as well. So continuing on, we have one more. We're going to do a margin bottom of 0 because paragraphs do have by default margin that the browser attaches to them, but it ends up pushing this down a little bit too far. So bottom 0, save it, and it pushes it back up a little bit more. All right, after that, we also have our two other sections, our sidebar, also our section of subscribe, and I'm choosing to add both of these selectors in one rule set here because they share a couple things, a couple properties and values that are the same. Font size, 0.9 rem units, so we're going to make them a little bit smaller than they are by default, and then line height as well, 1.6 EM units, like that. All right, so our section sidebar, we're going to say background. So another thing that is handy for if you're going to use Sass, you can use Sass variables. You don't necessarily have to. There are custom properties, as they're called, which is the native way to do it. But I'm just going to do this anyhow just to show you. So we're going to have only three of them, not a big deal. And that is these right here. So our primary color is just going to be this yellow color that we had over. Actually, I was using a different one. Let's use this one right here. There we go. We just click on this and you can grab the color code right there. So we want to create a variable for that. That way, if you ever want to experiment and change up colors, you can so easily by changing this value up here at the top. So now if we come down all the way down here so far, and we can just say, reference that primary color right here. And there it is. Awesome, awesome stuff. So then we can go ahead and reference our read button in here specifically. So we're going to say read btn. Again, this is all coming from, let's see here, we're in our sidebar, inner, and let's see, our read button is right here. So it's in reference to this right here. Our read button, I want to do a margin top of like 2 EM units. And also display block to make that even work. And then also background position is going to be 0 and 0.3 EM. So the background, of course, is this little right here. I thought we needed to push it down just a bit because it's up too high. All right. Actually, it looks that's a little bit too much. There we go. All right, anyhow, that's good. And now, after that, we have our subscribe. This is looking pretty good right here, as is this as well. So we do need to finish up with that one, though. And we're getting close to getting finished here with the CSS at least. So section subscribe. We're going to say, let's do our input because this looks like garbage. So we're going to say our input is going to be, let's see here, not Q, sorry. We're going to say width. Now again, we have to use calc, 100% minus 2em. There we go. We're going to say padding is 1em. So we want to give it space inside. That text being right up against there just looks so bad. Font family, you have to add this as well for certain elements like inputs. And then also margin bottom, we'll push it down to like 1em. There, things have room to breathe now. So our button as well. So the button, it's black and has white text. Or wait, that wasn't white. Well, we're going to make it white anyway. So we're going to do width. It was gray. Oh, what am I doing? Put in the freaking selector. Button. There we go. So width, 100%. We'll do background. Now, we created a variable up top, the submit btn bg color. Also, we're going to do color. It's going to be submit btn color. And that's not showing up because I put a hash sign instead. All right, and then also padding is going to be 1em. A border is none because by default for buttons it adds this little emboss effect. There we go. Now it's just a flat black. And then font family, Montserrat as well. Okay. All right, this is looking good. So now all of the CSS for our mobile first viewport is looking solid. So if you were to visit this on this phone or on a phone or something, a small device, or like you are in the browser here, it all looks pretty solid. I'm happy with it. But as we start to go out, if you visit on a desktop, this looks ridiculous, which is what, you know, the purpose of responsive design actually is. So we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we want things to start adjusting? At what point do we want to go from this sort of stacked block level layout to this one where we have this big element here and then this up here and then this over here? All right, so let's write out our first media query right here. So I'm going to paste this in right there. Now a standard breakpoint is 768 pixels. Doesn't mean you have to use it. The way you get to know where, you know, what the width is in pixels right here, in Chrome you can hit Control Shift and I. You could do this in Firefox as well, and you can see as I drag this in, this value right here is adjusted. So we can see the width 768 is like right here. So I think this is pretty good. Once we get beyond here, we can start adjusting the layout to look different. The one thing we can do is probably increase the size of the type beyond 768. Things are looking a little bit small. I'd like to increase it just a bit, along with all of the margins and padding. So watch how cool this is. I'm going to specify our HTML element, font size. Now, font size, the default font size of the HTML element that browsers give it is 16 pixels. And when we use rem units and em units, it's basing its size off of that 16 pixels. So if we say 1 em, then we're saying 16 pixels if we haven't overwritten the body or the font size on the HTML element. And also, if we were to say like 3 em, it would be 16 times 3. So whatever that equals. I'm not great with math. So that's what it would be in pixels. So if we use this media query, we're saying anything larger than, you can also use max width, but for mobile first we use min width. We're saying anything beyond 768 and 768 pixels itself for the viewport width, whether that be on somebody's phone or on the browser, then we're going to reset the font size. We're going to make it a little bit larger than 16 pixels, which is the default size. So let's make it 18 pixels. Save it, and notice how everything just grew. the padding, or the white space, grew along with the font size. So we go from here to there. Can you see that right there? We can notice that the white space up here is adjusting around here. We can even make this much more exaggerated. If I made this 28 pixels, I mean, look at that. Crazy. But everything just adjusts itself easily when you use your properties correctly. So again, we only want it to be slightly larger just to make it get a little bit larger. Okay, so let's do another media query. I'm just going to copy this. And this one's going to be like around 1020. So at this one, we're going to have several overwrites. So first of all, the background, I chose on mobile just to have this white sort of background here because it would be hard to see home, about, and contact over this guy's hair because it's like the same color. But after that, because we're reverting to this, we're going to revert to this layout. It's going to be over this this yellowish area. So we can get rid of the header, the background. We're going to say none because if you scroll up here and we find our header element, we'll see we have a background of white. So this is setting it to none. So we save it, we go up, and right here is the point at which we're going to adjust this stuff as well to look like our Adobe XD prototype. Right there is 1020. Okay, so let's continue on. What else do we want to do? Well, we need to make this stacked layout into one that has two columns. So we're going to say a wrapper. We're going to display grid. Now, before we didn't have to do display, actually, did we? Yeah, we did have display grid on this. So actually, I don't even have to add that. That was my error. What we're going to do is we're going to use some of these CSS Grid's other properties to make it look like we want it to. So grid template columns, we're going to say we have two columns that are about 70%, and we're going to say auto. So what this means is the width of this element should be around 70%, which it is, and then these will take up the rest of the space, the available space. So we can see already we have something that's almost working, but not quite. We're going to do grid template rows, 60%, and auto. So what does that mean? Well, it means this is taking up about 60%. It's not quite halfway, which would be right there. It's more like right here. It's about 60%. All right, so rows is in relation to, stacking things like this, and then columns are vertical. Rows are horizontal. So then we're going to say grid template areas. And if all this grid stuff is confusing you, I do have a tutorial on the CSS Grid, and you can use my channel search to find that as well. We're just going to call the first one hero and featured, and then hero as well in subscribe. So this is going to be confusing to you if you never encountered it. But basically what's happening here is, if I move this over and scale it down, go like this. There we go. I wanted you to be able to see both of these. What we've essentially done is we said through these two values right here, 70% in auto, we said, okay, we want two columns. And then for the rows, we said 60% in auto. That's another two columns. So if you think of it, you have to think of it like just four squares that are stacked with each other. And we don't really we only have three, right? So grid template areas allows you to define and take these four sections, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and through naming conventions, we'll say the top left square and the bottom left square we're going to be giving them the same name, so they should be joined. So it creates this layout right here instead of, for instance, something like this where we have a section here, a section here, and a section here. So hopefully that makes sense and I described that well. Give me a comment if I did. All right. And just be quiet if I didn't. All right. So we're going to say 100% viewport. So we save this. All right. We're not quite there yet. And that's because we need to define, using the grid area property, which one is hero. All right. So once we do that, this is gonna go over there in a sense. So we're going to reference our, let's see here, our section.hero. And we're going to say grid area is hero. Ta-da! Now look at that. So it maintains right here all the way up until we get to 1020. It maintains this stacked, and then all this stuff starts to come into play. Now, of course, we still have work because it doesn't look great, but we'll work with that. Let's keep on going. We're actually very, very close to being done. Section hero. After this, yeah, we only have a couple more rule sets. We're going to say section. We're going to display grid. So we're taking all three of our section elements right here, and we're going to turn them into grid containers. So we're going to say grid template rows is going to be auto and align items center vertically. So that pushes things down like this. All right. There's one element that I believe I certainly left out because this is supposed to be bigger. Let me find where that's at. Yes, it is right here. I forgot to add H1, and this is up in the regular mobile first, regular CSS. Font size is going to be 2.4 rem units. There we go. So now it's much bigger. It's significantly bigger than this and this. I forgot that element. Sorry about that. There we go. Awesome, awesome stuff. Okay. So now finally, there's one other thing. There's one other viewport that I wanted to add here. I'm not sure if we'll be able to recognize it on my monitor resolution. Is min width 1800 pixels, so even larger. I wanted to blow things up even more because on a 4K monitor, if somebody has that browser window, you know, maximized, fully maximized, this type looks too small. So this is bumping things up from 18 pixels to 21. So let's see if we can even see that. Yeah, it's actually right there. All right, cool. So that is the CSS and the HTML portion. We're not done yet because we want to give it some sort of interesting animation. So when it comes to animation and your UI designs, you have a lot of different options. You can go through just CSS animations where you can handle animations within here. But usually if you have more complex sort of animation sequences that you want to work in, you can use something like GSAP. There are other libraries that you can use, but GSAP is the Greensock animation platform. It's like the most powerful, in my opinion, animation platform that you can use, and you use it with JavaScript. All right, so if you have HTML and CSS, you also have JavaScript. If you want to integrate or implement any sort of advanced UI or interactivity and different things like that, JavaScript is a huge term, and if you're going to be a front-end developer, you're going to have to know it anyway. But don't worry, the JavaScript for this isn't very bad at all. So, oh, and by the way, I also have GSAP tutorials and crash courses on my channel. Boy, I've been talking too much straight. My brain's not working. So the first thing we're going to need to do is import tweenmax, which is from GSAP, into our HTML element just before the closing body tag, like this. So if I fully expand this, this is what this looks like. By the way, you can grab all this code from the Codepen mentioned in the YouTube description. So we're just going to do inline not inline HTML, but inline JavaScript, and we do that through this tag here. We could have also created a separate JS file and done that, but I just want to keep things simple. So the let's see. What we're going to do is, the first thing is we're going to say var TL for timeline equals new timeline max. So if you're confused about this, and you probably would be if you've never touched it before, if you type in GSAP timeline max, these are the documentations that will kind of describe everything that you can do. There's so much that you can do with it. So I really suggest checking that out, and also my videos on introducing you to it. So we create an instance of timeline max through a variable called TL. So now we can say TL, we can use from, to or stagger from or stagger to. So I'm just going to use from first. All right, so we're going to say from, and we're going to say section. All right, so this is going to target all of our sections. So we have 3 of them, and we're going to apply some sort of animation to it. So we're going to say the next parameter, separated by a comma, we're going to say that's the duration. How long should this animation last? We'll say 2 seconds. And we're going to say opacity is 0. And this is where we start writing inside of this object right here, all of these properties, and these are properties that we can animate going from. All right, so I'll show you the difference between from and stagger from. So we'll say scale is going to be 0.5. So we're going to make it completely hidden. So you won't be able to see it because the opacity is 0. And the scale is just going to go half of what it is by default. And then we can give it a custom easing, which controls how this right here is applied. I might as well just show you real quickly what that is. GSAP easing. So if you type that in, we can go to the docs where it says your easing sections, and it will give you this little sort of visualizer in a sense. And it just affects how the animation appears. For instance, it really makes it look, there's a lot of crazy things that'll start fast and then go slow and then start fast again. So it's just a way for you to experiment with the way the animation motion looks like. And based on what you choose over here, it shows you down here the property that you need to specify. So ours, we're going to say it's going to be the power 2 option with ease out. And we're going to put in right here, I believe this is for the delay, 0.2. So we save that and we refresh. Look at that. Now, due to the frame rate of the video recording right here, it might look jagged, but for me, it looks very smooth. Now, because we're using from, they're all basically having their animation applied at the same time simultaneously. You can see all 3 come in at the same time. Before I show you that difference, let's do 2. If you choose 2, it's going to go from its default state in the browser to these properties. So hopefully you understand that. We don't want that. We want from, but we want stagger from. And that's what this value is. I'm sorry. This is like the stagger duration between each element. So let's refresh this after saving that. So now you can just notice first this comes in, then that, then this. We can make that more obvious if we choose this, maybe like make it something crazy like 1 second. So if I refresh for 1 second, and then this one shows up, and then this one starts happening. That's what the power of GSAP. I just love it. But we're just going to do 0.2. All right, so next we're going to do another TL stagger from, because we have other elements that we want to animate. So H1, H2. So we're going to select both of our H1 and H2 elements, and we're going to say for a 0.5 duration, we're going to animate the following properties. So opacity will be 0. We'll say Y, so you can move things around on the Y-axis, which is horizontally. We'll say -40. And then ease is going to be power 2. We'll do ease in and out this time. And again, 0.2. And we can also do an offset. So let me show you what that means. And we're not going to do it yet. So let's refresh that. These all start coming in, and then these show up. That doesn't make sense, though, because it looks kind of weird without nothing there. So we can do what's called an offset to make these animate simultaneously. So the way we do that is put another parameter down here, and we put in minus equals, and then the number of seconds from which it should come in. And really, that means these are all going to be pretty much at the same time, because this is a duration of 2 seconds. So yeah, it's a duration of 2 seconds for each one with an offset of 0.2. So it ends up like being 2.6 seconds total. So let's refresh this. This comes in, then they come in almost like in 0.6 seconds, like that. All right, so this looks weird having this show up like that with nothing at the top, right? I mean, they're just sitting there. We want these to kind of come in last, these things. And if you recall, when it came to writing the HTML markup for this, we wrapped that supporting content in a class called anim panel here, anim panel there, and anim panel there. So now let's just copy this real quick. We're going to choose for this third one and final one, anim panel. And that will take all that content that's the child elements in there and animate them as well. This will be 1 second. And this is going to be, yeah, actually, it's going to be the same practically. Just Y40, opacity 0, power 2 easing out. And this time it's going to be 1.5 for the delay. So let's try this now. Oh, and by the way, I was wrong. Y is not, I don't know why I thought that. Y is on the vertical axis, not the horizontal axis. Okay. So let's try this again. Comes in. Very, 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 very cool stuff. All right. So there's one thing that you need to consider here. If you were to have this live, I know when I put it on Codepen, there was a flicker. It would like flicker. You would see the interface for a split second, and then the animation would come in. Well, because we're dealing with things locally, that's not happening. But if you were to make this live, apparently that's an issue. And so the way we would solve that flickering issue, and the flickering is happening because it has to download the various assets, such as GSAP. Which is this script tag right here. And when it's downloading it, none of this stuff is working. And so that's why you see the interface initially. So to fix that, what I did is I chose display none on the body element, which hides everything by default. So now if we were to save this, we're not going to see anything. So we come back down to our index.html. And we have to define a couple things. So first, we're going to add this line right here. All right. So this is going to say anything inside of this section right here. Oops, wrong buttons. DOM content loaded. So this is an event listener. Then it's going to run our code that we want. Now, before we add our code and we copy and paste our code inside of here, we're going to add a couple other things. So we're going to do window.add event listener on load. Again, let's close that. And also, we want to add a secondary parameter called false down here. And then we're going to paste in all this stuff right here. Let's delete it. Copy it first, of course. And let's tab this up. Okay. That's looking good. And then before we do any of that, we have to modify this property to display it to a block level again, which is the default, what it would be by default. So document.body.style.display equals block right there. Oops. So let's save. And you're not really going to notice anything much of a difference. So like if we refresh, it's going to look like it did before, but now if you go live, it's not going to have that flicker issue. I wanted to show you because I encountered that as well. All right, so also this works if you're in a mobile viewport, by the way. So if we refresh, you'll see these come in like that, and it still works. All right, very, very cool. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that and you learned a lot. I know we covered a lot of ground. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe. If you haven't, click the bell notification icon right next to that subscribe button as always, and I will see you guys real soon. Goodbye.